Yeah. So I hope everyone is okay with this, that we are recording. I think we have it already displayed on the screen as well. So I would like to welcome everyone to PKPD Programming Forum session. Today's session is update on CDISC ADaM Population PK Data Standard, ADPPK. In 2020, the ISoP Data Standard Working Group took this population PK standard to the CDISC ADaM Working Group to make it CDISC compliant. Our presenter today is Neelima Thanneer, who will provide updates and discuss the standard in detail. Neelima is currently the head of data science and clinical pharmacology analysis and reporting at BMS. He has been with BMS for the past 13 years. Neelima has a master's degree in electrical engineering from George Mason University. She is the co-founder of PKPD Programming Forum. She has done several poster and oral presentations at various conferences on best practices for pharmacometric programming. So with no further ado, I would like to invite Neelima to start her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, please see the disclaimer, and if you don't want to be recorded, please hold your questions till the end, and then we will stop recording for the Q&A portion. So some background, because I wasn't sure the audience if they have been following or not. So the data standards for population PK analysis working group has started in late 2015 under the sponsorship of ISoP, and it's led by Andriana and myself. And there were several representatives, approximately 30 scientists and programmers, including FDA across the industry. The group worked on the standard for data sets used for population PK analysis with the goal to improve the quality, reduce the time required to specify, implement, and review data sets, and most importantly, to be able to share without having to have challenges in understanding the standard. So we have published this in November 2020 at ACOP on ISoP website under the sponsorship of ISoP. And after that, we developed the standard in the spirit of CDISC, but it's not completely compliant. So the working group has been working with the CDISC to bring the standards into alignment with the requirements of CDISC. For more information on the existing standard that we posted on ISoP, you could follow that link. So right after we published the ISoP standard, we have been, even before that, we've been in talks with the CDISC people, and then we have started the working group for ADaM at ADPPK, and that's led by me and Luke, established in December 2020. We have approximately 20 people, including CDISC experts, programmers, pharmacometricians, and several members of ISoP working group members, and some of you are here as well. So the group has been working to make the ISoP standard compliant with BDS. It would be considered a subclass of BDS and generally follow BDS. It would leverage components of AD and CA. That has been in place, and it can work with any modeling software with minimum processing. And I'll get to details in a little bit. Just a quick status, we completed the draft and currently at the stage of addressing comments from the ADaM review, and it's going very nice. So yeah, I don't know how many of you have taken a look at the existing ISoP standard, but I'm going to go from there and then not give all the background on what we have done in ISoP standard. So some things that have changed since then and some things that did not change. So we were unsure that if we would have the ability to keep some of the software specific variables that are required for modeling, like DV for dependent variable, EVID for event ID and compartment, and some other variables. But we were able to get an okay to keep those variables. So that's a great sign. And we had to rename several variables to be compliant with BDS. And I will get to that as well. And added variables like param CD, eval to be compliant with BDS. If you see, I mean, param and eval are kind of, DV and EVID, right? So it will be repetitive information, but these variables are required to be compliant with BDS. So we will have both these variables. You may choose to not use in the analysis, but they will be there in the data set. And without complicating what to use as values for param and param CD for dosing records, because the programming can be done either with SDTM datasets where there's no param and param CD, and then what value we put, and sometimes it's from the ADaM, and then sometimes we integrate studies with legacy datasets, SDTM, ADaM, and whatnot, different kinds of formats. So how would we address populating these variables, right? So simply just going by the definition of param and param CD, it's an identifier for that record. So we could use as simple as dose in parenthesis unit and the dose for param CD. We also included some flag variables for exclusion and imputations. What that means is we have, these are not 1 and 0 flags. These are the variables that include, that identify if a particular dosing record or a PK record have any issues and potential exclusion in the analysis, then they will be identified in these variables. Similarly, if we have modified a record, let's say dose date is available, but the time was missing, and then we imputed. So we will have an ability to identify those records and then put it into a variable. So it's easily traceable on what has changed. In addition, the date and time variable is included for traceability and ease of identifying issues with the record. It helps a lot with tracking down issues and also merging time-varying covariates in future, and then deriving, any time-related variables. So we also define naming conventions for covariates. I'll show that in a minute. There was a lot of discussion whether numeric version of the variable is primary or character version of the variable is primary, because we have a lot of pairs of variables where we have numeric and the character. In the analysis, all the numeric variables will be kept, character variables will be pushed to the right, and the software can ignore them, but the data set will contain both. And something else is, we've decided from the beginning that units for all the variables will be added in the labels for the variables and not as a variable. There are some exceptions to that, like a value, I think, which is required when eval is there. So yeah, so those are some of the changes. It's not an exhaustive list of changes. Whatever I could think of, I've put in here. Let me quickly show the structure. A little bit. Okay, so this is how the table would look like, the data structure and the variables. If you have seen the ISoP standard, you will be familiar with it. So things, like I said, the variable names are compliant with BDS now. Some people are used to calling the actual time from first dose differently, and we named it to AFRLT, which is actual relative time for first dose. And one other change is for, related to all the time variables for nominal time and actual time. As you could see, we could keep the software specific variables like occasion, EVID, and DV, etc. So the flag variables I was talking about, again, they need to be, there are two sets of them. So one is the exclusion records, and then the other one is records identifying with issues, like reason for flagged records. It could be a VLQ sample, it could be day one pre-dose sample, or it could be dose time imputation. So the difference between these two sets, so one is the numeric record exclusion, other one is the character, actual, comment for the record exclusion. And the second set is the reason for flagging, numeric, and the character. So this gives ability to, identify the records and gives the traceability. And even when you're writing report at the end, if you want to summarize how many samples you've included and how many samples you've excluded, this comes in, as a traceability as well. So yeah, we did include eval, like I said, in eval C and eval U. I wanted to show a little bit about, variables that come from different domains like PC or some PD data from some other domains and dosing data from exposure. And when we have a record coming from multiple sources, we have, for example, here, this is upper limit of quantification and lower limit of quantification. So first, I think what we had in original ISoP spec was PC ULOQ and PC LLOQ, but that's not really inclusive of, other records that may be there. So I think we went with a ULOQ and a LLOQ. And similarly, there we included the date time of each event. If it's a dosing record, it's the dose date and time. If it's a PK record, it's PK date and time. And originally, I think we called it EVDTC because it's the event date and time. But the feedback we've got from the ADPPK working group, from the CDISC experts, is to change it to U, because U kind of means it can come from different domains again. Those are some of the principles. The most of this time in the working group was spent in understanding each variable and identifying the source and checking if it's violating any BDS principles, renaming, or adding additional notes to the CDISC notes here to make it more clear, and properly identifying where it's coming from. And other thing we spent more time also is to see which ones are required versus permissible versus conditional. We didn't have any conditional, I guess, when we were with the ISoP, but we learned as we progressed through CDISC working group that some variables had to be changed to conditional. And what else? And the numeric versus character, right? So I'll show you, for example, the formulation. So the drug formulation is character, and it's coming from, EX dose form or protocol, or you could derive, based on the information that you get from the protocol. And then you have a numeric version of it. So for the most part, the character version is the primary, and the numeric version has the N. So whichever is the primary, that won't have the letter, and the other one will have the letter at the end. So that was one other decision that we had to go through for all the variables. And code lists for some of them, especially in the covariates. So maybe let me go to the covariates. Yeah, so code list for, what one, and for the numeric, the decodes basically, one would be male, two would be female, and same with race. Main reason is to, again, we want everybody to program. The intent is to use the same decodes. So let's say if we are working with our external partners or vendors or anyone, there shouldn't be any ambiguity, or when we are integrating multiple studies together, we don't have to go and again change the codes. Okay, 0 for a female is now changed to 2 female. So so we wanted to enforce the decodes to be standardized as well. So, and we have defined how to name covariates as well. So the convention that we have recommended here is to end with the variable name end with BL for all the baseline covariates, and end with N if it's a numeric version of the categorical covariate like race N, sex N. And end with I for any covariate with imputed values. So instead of imputing, let's say there's a missing body weight, instead of imputing within that variable, like create another variable like WTI and use that for the imputed variable, values. So that way you're keeping the traceability for the original variable, and it also helps you when you're writing the report if you wanted to summarize how many subject had missing body weight. So this is a variable that you can pull it from. If you had imputed, then it would just overwrite in the same variable. So and you could also group, this is something that we added very recently, is GRY. What this is, if you want to further categorize, let's say weight groups into bands, into groups, or age groups for pediatric studies 0 to 6 months, or you could also use covariate name and GR to categorize that. So as per the actual name here, this is not an exhaustive list. Like you could see, we've only put in basic covariates here, basic baseline and time varying covariates. But the idea is if you have a new covariate, like let's say you have a GFR and then it's not here, you could call GFR or EGFR and then add BL at the end for baseline, and don't add BL for time varying. If you're not adding, the variable name by itself is time varying. So there's also a discussion on should we make a preferred list of covariate variables. That's something we could discuss at the end of the meeting. So we can keep on updating that list with CDISC on what a particular covariate can be called. So yeah, one other thing, that exception here, all the baseline covariates end with BL except age. Age is age for the most part. It is baseline, and whether you're bringing it from DM or ADSL, or if you're deriving it from birth date to current date. So the reason for, we did have BL for a while and then we removed it because for the most part age is baseline, and for those few cases where you are having pediatric studies where you're recording, where your analysis needs both baseline age and time varying age, instead of calling age BL, we added a variable called age TPT, which is age at analysis time point. Because baseline age is called age in other domains, we cannot rename it to age BL here by using the same definition for baseline in both the places. Whereas for others, the definition for baseline can vary sometimes if the SAP has different definition and the pharmacometric analysis may have different definition. I'm not saying it is always different. There are cases it might be different. Okay, so let's go back to the slide deck. Actually, before I go, so there's a lot more information, and then you can find the same information in the link at the ISoP as well, for derivations, for basic common covariates, it's all listed here. And also how to handle when something is missing. Also, we have some recommendation. And we have detailed imputation rules for missing data, with the with the recommendation that imputation should be avoided as much as possible, but it may be required in some cases where complete dosing history is not available. It's important to have CRFs collect the required information. So we should always strive to be part of those CRF design meetings and then get the required information. But there will be cases where, those date is available, time is missing, so the best practices are here listed on how to impute those. So when we are working with external partners, there's no ambiguity on, what they've used for imputation versus what we've used. And when you're integrating multiple studies, the intent is all the studies within that program, within that project should follow the same imputation rules. I'm going to go back to the presentation. So, I mean, throughout these meetings with the CDISC working group, we got very, very great feedback from CDISC experts, and every member who participated in discussions, it only improved the standard from where we were to where we have come. It has become much more streamlined and much more robust. I want to talk a little bit now on, how to implement, because that's the next question that comes in every organization. What would it take for me to convert to this standard? What are the challenges, or what do I need to know? So I'm going to give an example of what we have done in BMS. So during the development of ISoP standard, and right after, actually even before we published, we started adopting the ISoP standard. So we have built a web application to standardize and automate the dataset specification. So there's a poster that I've done and presented at ACOP. I'll share that link as well, but that has a lot more detail on the web app. So the main thing to build anything or automate anything is you need the input to be standard. So if you have a standard spec that has the minimum amount of variables common across the projects, then you can build something like this. It enforces standardization of spec across the projects, regardless of the TA. And brings efficiency and quality in the spec creation. So we built like specs templates for different compounds. This is a drop-down list. I took a screenshot of the app, but we have a POP-PK ISoP spec for, let's say, a compound called Nevo and a compound called Rela, and then we have a POP-PK standard spec, and then we can although all of them are more or less same, we have some compound specific variables added in there. So you could reuse those specs. You can search and then just add. So what these built-in templates have is all the variable names, the structure, the attributes, the derivations, flags, imputation rules, everything is pre-populated already. And there's very minimum that a pharmacometrician needs to enter that is study specific. This has eliminated a lot of churn and iterations between programmer and pharmacometrician. And the other thing is also it throws warnings, when people are not following standards and give a variable name that's longer than 8 characters, or they forget to add something, one of the attributes for any new variable. So it has built-in checks that, we don't have to again go and make changes. So while you're typing it, while you're entering it will give you that intuitively errors, so you can fix that. So overall my experience has been it has saved great deal of amount, and then we can focus more on the actual work and not worrying about creating a robust spec. And it gives, like I said, the ability to search and import the existing specification form and modify as needed. So I just put a small screenshot on the right here. You can filter either by spec ID or compound or dataset type, POP-PK or ER, or who created it or what indication it is. So there are a number of search filters you could have. And then once it comes up, you could just import that spec, and then you can add a new study to it and then modify very little. And sometimes you don't need to modify if it's exactly the same spec, and you just need to add it another study. So you just change the study design part of it, like what's the dosing schedule, etc. So, and collaborating with external partners becomes so easy with standard spec. Otherwise, you would have like so many different meetings, with vendors, and come to a common spec. So transition to new standard. So so I'm going to just explain how we have done, and then I'll open up for discussion at the end. So we started implementation with new projects. So anything brand new that's starting, we are going to use the new spec with ISoP standards. And eventually when ADPPK releases in CDISC, it's very easy for us to convert, because there are very minimum changes, and we could do it at the application level. So we don't have to change each and every spec that was done. So you just map whatever variable names that are changed to the new ones. So yeah, the way we did it is we started with the new ones, and then any critical projects where old studies needed to be pooled with the new study, we followed the old standard, because we didn't want to put the timelines for these projects in jeopardy by adding another layer of complexity to both programmers and pharmacometricians. So we let them finish in the way they were already. And then we began transition to new standard for the rest of the studies. And as and when those old studies are done, there were no more any running in the old way. There are some changes needed in the workflow. For example, programming needs to change to to adapt to these. And from pharmacometrician side, they are used to using their chunk of R code for post-processing this data set, and they need to get used to this new terminology for variable names. So that was a little bit of uptake, but once they're done with a few projects, it has become normal and standard for them. So we didn't hear any pushback from them, at least in my experience. So mapping historical studies to new standard when pooling is going to be challenging. Let's say you have 10 studies already done in an old standard, and you're adding 2 more new studies to it. You do need to map those old ones to new. So sometimes there are challenges in finding consistency, whether it's rules for derivations or baseline. I mean, there are general issues anyways, but in this case, you also have to align with the naming convention. Some variables may not even exist in the new standard. So, so those are the things that that I found are important to bring up here for people who are considering transition to the new standard. And one more thing I want to mention is we are planning to open source this web app. So shortly, sometime this year, you will see that in Git, and then I will communicate within ISoP or appropriate channels, so everybody can adapt to their companies and their workflows. So people don't have to reinvent the wheel. And just utilize this, and it will be already in either ISoP or ADPPK standard. So there will be very minimum changes that you would need to do. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation on the, either the CDISC standard or the background, or, how to transition. Some of the discussion points I thought it would be nice to discuss are here, but I just want to open up for questions before we go. Any questions?
Hi, Neelima. This is Jing. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And I can see there are lots of work from many experts for years. Thank you for sharing the details with us. I have a question regarding the character variables. NumMem does not allow character variables, but in the standard specs, there are many variables with numeric version and a character version. Since now the spec will be released for adoption, when people are thinking how to implement it, what's your recommendation to deal with the character variables?
Okay, so thank you, Jing, so much for the question and the comment. The way to deal with this, at least in NumMem, is you can put all your numeric variables first, order them in a way, and then push all the character variables to the right side, to the right end. And then when you're reading in your NumMem control file, you could just read the numeric ones and put an ignore after the first, when this character variables start coming. That's how our pharmacometricians are doing it. We do not have two separate data sets, one for modeler, one for programmer, and then ISoP. So we just wanted to eliminate having multiple versions of the data sets. So there is only one data set and it will have everything, and the tool will have to adjust to it. Like I said, there's an ignore statement, at least within non-mem, or option to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Tim Harrington. I have a quick question. I'm not exactly sure how relevant this is, but it concerns PK timing variables. We used to have variables like ACT-TM-FDS, actual time from first dose, ACT-TM-MRD, actual time from most recent dose. In more recent studies, I've seen AREL-TM1, AREL-TM2, AREL-TM3, and so on. And similarly for the nominal times, NREL-TM1, NREL-TM2. Is that a standard naming convention that's going to be globally used for PK data?
Yeah, so the variable names right now after, one second, I'm just going to bring up, so I'll show you the actual naming convention. So we did discuss quite a bit on, what those variables are called. I think we went with what is the current compliant naming convention within BDS, and then we went with AFRLT for actual time related to first dose, and APRLT for actual time related to previous dose. And same with the nominal set of variables, NFRLT and NPRLT. So those will be the standard going forward.
Oh, because that's new to me. I've never heard of that. We started out with things like non-TM-FDS, non-TM-MRD, then non-REL-TM1, non-REL-TM2. So it's going to be, so I need to, maybe in future studies, I will see that then. It's, was it AFRLT and NFRLT and NPRLT, NPRLT, and presumably there are others for like trough pre-dose or nominal time post-dose negative values imputed to 0. Presumably that there's going to be a series of variables then that are related.
Yeah, so up until now, I mean, every company and every function named them however they want, right? Some people called it TIME time, and then some people call, like we used to call ATFD, which is actual time after first dose, and some people call TSLD, time since last dose. So it was different, and one of the reason for this standard is to call it same. So when we are working together, there shouldn't be any issues. So yeah, once this is released, you will see this adapted to every company,
Okay, well that sounds good. I look forward to that. And thanks for an informative presentation.
Thank you for a question.
Hi, Neelima. Do you have time for more question? One more question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, this is Jane. Actually, my question is very similar. I mean, related to the question just asked by a gentleman. So NCA data sets standard are also or to be released or already released at the very beginning of your slides, right? And then the variables, so based on the practice in our company, the PPK data set usually created based on the ADPC, or you can say ADNCA. And then do you see the variable name consistency from ADNCA to ADPPK?
Yes. Whatever we are picking directly from PC, you will see, except with the exception of PC LOQ and PC ULOQ, the upper limit and lower limit variables. Because this is not just a PK data set, it is a POP-PK data set. We rename that to accommodate different domains. Let's say you have PD LLOQ and PD ULOQ, right? So that's the only. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, I think you should be able to, yeah.
And then for the time variable, I think NCA also have the time variable. For example, the variable we just talked about. So do you see the renaming in the NCA data set as well for the AFRLT And then I also have a question about the similarly for EX dose form, EX route. So all those usually carry over from ADNCA or ADPC. So do you expect naming change in the NCA data set as well?
So I don't know which, are you already using Jane, the ADNCA data set? Or are you already, you have adapted to the new ADNCA?
No, we did
Okay.
not. I just want
Okay.
to ask whether there's an alignment between
Right.
ADNCA
Yeah.
and the ADPPK.
For all the common variables, if they are exactly same between both, we did pay attention to that. But I'm not, so you also asked another question about the form. So let me go to the form variable, 1 second.
Yeah, EX form and EX route.
Yeah, so root and form, if it's coming from exposure, we are mapping to root. We are not calling it EX root, obviously, because this is not an EX data set. Same with formulation, if you are using it from, because not always it's possible to use it from EX. Sometimes you do derive it from protocol, so we are calling it form, so not EX dose form.
Yeah. Do you have time for another question, or I can save question at the end?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, another question is, can you elaborate more about the age TPT?
Yes.
We know age is a covariable for ADSL. So what's the reason we have to have a age TPT?
So age TPT is some analysis require time varying age. Okay, so they need age at time point. So like for pediatric studies, the age changes, right? Like 2 months at 1 point, 6 months, and then 1 year, 1.5 years. So there's analysis done on time varying age to recommend appropriate dose for different age groups, right? So for that reason, we included age TPT, which is age at analysis time point. And the regular age AGE variable is the baseline.
And do we have a flexibility to change number of years to number of months for pediatric study? Or is
yeah, you can do that and specify the unit in the label for your variable.
I see. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your question. Other questions, feel free to stop me. I'm just going to discuss some of the points I've put here. So like I said, what can I define versus what is already pre-specified in covariates? That's something, we've been discussing in our PKPD programming forum as well. So like I said here, the covariates it's a set list. What can I add more versus what's predefined? Like, I wanted to get some thoughts from this group, since there are so many of you here. Do you prefer to have a preferred list and then have it updated? Like we can have a preferred terms committee, and whenever we want to update new covariate terms, we can add them. That doesn't preclude from us, adding more covariates on our own following these naming convention. But do you, let's say if there's a new covariate that's not listed here and I name it something, and then you name it something, and both of us will follow, of course, the BL part of it for baseline. But the first few letters of the covariate could be different because we didn't exactly specify how you have to name them. So you could call it GFR or EGFR or something like that. So if there is an interest in having a preferred term list for the names of the covariates, that's something that CDISC experts have said that we could do that as well, and then keep it updating periodically to add more and more terms to it. Any thoughts on that?
Hi Neelima, Samarth here. Yeah, I agree with your thoughts, because end of the day, if we are planning to get a standardization for PK, and even though the suffix is going to be same for the covariate, but initial few words, if it's same, if you have a standardization or if you have a list of covariates, and then it would be look more standard, compared to different name for each company or each individual are using.
Right, right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Other people's thoughts? We can take this feedback back to the, CDISC working group.
Hi, Neelima. This is Jing Su. I think the covariates are based on the modeling needs. And then if there's need for additional covariates, we can follow the typical item naming convention, since very likely we got it from another item data set. For that reason, I think we do not have to have a preferred item list for covariates.
Okay, so you think more or less, we will follow that. Let's say if it's a lab covariate like ALB, you would do ALBBL and ALB, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think we can give some general guidance about how to name the covariates, how to define them. For example, just follow the item naming convention, try to be consistent with other item data sets, etc. And again, it's really based on the modeling needs. The covariates needed for different model can be different. It will require lots of effort to maintain such preferred terms.
Yeah, that was my initial point when we were discussing this, is like I would not know what covariates I would need, honestly, and then until the analysis. But this doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, is what they've said. We could just add what we know now, and then we could keep on updating when we know more, and then more, and then more. So that's just an option to maintain that list if it's worth enforcing standards. So I see two different viewpoints. So yeah, I appreciate both the viewpoints.
Yeah, hi Neelima, this is Shweta here. Even I kind of agree with Jing here, because sometimes the lab test can be done even in two types, and there could be like multiple covariates for the similar test. Maybe some kind of assay 1 versus assay 2. I don't have the exact example. But then again, if we are kind of coding it, we don't know exactly which one. I mean, we need to know what test it is and what should be the code when we are putting it as a standard. I find it very difficult to know everything beforehand.
Okay, thanks, Shweta.
And since I'm unmuted, I have one more question.
Yeah.
So I don't see the C variable anymore in the specs. Did I miss it? Or now we just have that exclusion flag and numeric character and
yeah, that C variable is very archaic. So yeah, we have a better name, more self-descriptive exclusion flags that replace that C variable. Yeah, so I'm sure you will utilize this.
Okay.
And then it has the ability to have multiple values in it as well. It's not like a true flag, which is 1 or 0. So you could have multiple reasons, in there.
And I also saw there is DVID variable, which kind of explains what it is. Is it a analyte, PD, or dosing identifier, right?
Correct.
So should that be consistent with either param or param CD? Is there any recommendation in the specs?
Yeah, I think we may have put the note. So let me actually go see. It should be, I think we paired param CD with DVID, I guess. If not, we could definitely go and update the notes. No, I'm in baseline right now. Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, it would be a replica of that.
Yeah, because you don't want to create two different versions.
Yeah, there should be one-on-one correlation. Yeah, here we named it as analyte drug name, or other, it can come from either PC test or it can come from exposure. Now let me go and see. Maybe we don't have param CD here defined explicitly because we have listed any variables that we can that are already defined elsewhere within CDISC. We put there, but what I could do is go back and add some notes for DVID to be consistent with those.
Okay, and sorry, one more question. So we have these imputed variables like weight, WTI, and so on. And when we have these variables, we still need to add the imputation flag, flagging that this particular record was imputed. Is that what the recommendation is?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before this standard, we used to do either one of them. So in VMS, we
Right.
either used to add a flag for the imputed variable to track it, or we used to create another variable with the imputed values. But we have never done both. You know, it's kind of repetitive. We haven't recommended that you have to do both here. You know, the imputation flag or that other flag, you know, that we have where we keep track of imputed time and all. It's totally, you know, up to you on what are the things that you want to trace back to. If it's already being tracked in other variable, maybe you don't have to flag it again, you know. But if it's helpful for you to flag it for some other post processing, you could do it in both.
Okay.
Yeah. Great questions. Thank you, Shweta. Let me go back to the slide deck again. And please stop me if you have other questions. So some of the other discussion points are, can this include time varying PD data? So yes, it can, and the structure should suffice adding PD data either as a dependent variable or as a covariate. You know, you could as a dependent variable, and then you can add a DVID and then include PD records and extend this data set to not just POPPK but PKPD as well. Or you could just add PD markers as covariates if that's what the analysis need is, by merging with PK dates or, you know, visits, the time varying merge, and then use the PD marker as a covariate. So the structure can be extended to PD data.
And for the structure, if we need to add any dummy observation records for the modeling purposes, can we add that? And do we need to flag those new added records?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I haven't seen any examples, at least in my experience, where we had to add dummy records, but I know, like you said, there was an example where it required for you to add additional, you know, dummy PK and dosing records. So if at all you're doing that, I think they need to be flagged with appropriate indicator on why those were added. But it will again follow the same structure. So there's nothing that is stopping you from doing that. So one more thing I wanted to point out is, you know, if at all some of these naming conventions are problematic with any of the choice of tool that you're using, you could always rename within your control file. For example, these are all read with the position, right? You know, if the first column variable name is subject ID in the data set, you know, you can read into non-mem and then call it ID or whatever, you know. So if you don't have to change the name in the data set, but inside your software while you're reading into your control file, you still have the ability to change. Just want to point that out as well. And some of the questions I got outside is, you know, when is expected to release and what's the FDA thoughts on it? You know, FDA has participated both in ISoP working group and CDISC ADPP working group, and they've been very actively engaged in both the working groups, and they're eagerly waiting for the release of this as well. And they will encourage, you know, using this widely. And the expected releases, I think, you know, we have few more steps in there. We are currently at the stage of, you know, reviewing comments and addressing comments from the ADaM. Hopefully we'll get to it, you know, early next year. But yeah, that's the plan. Yeah. Other questions? So that's my end of presentation. Again, thank you so much for everybody for joining. So I'll take some more questions if you have any.